are watching West Hartford Community Television.
You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
For the community, by the community.
Good evening. Welcome to As I See It, A Blind Woman's View. I'm ANDREA GIUDICE, and I'm your host for this evening. Thank you again for tuning in. As always, I have with me my guide dog, who I'm not introducing for his focus and our safety. It's awesome to be back again tonight. I'm so glad that everyone keeps watching, so I have a reason to come to do the show. Tonight, we're going to be talking about resources and services that exist on the state and local level for people who are blind. And this all came about because of a conversation I was having with a friend of mine, and I realized that not only was she not experienced with those things in her own personal life because of not having a blind person in her family, but also that professionally there were services and resources that could be very beneficial. So I brought her with me tonight, and I wanted to recreate that conversation. So Janet, thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate it. And I'll have you just introduce yourself and tell us what you want to play on TV tonight.
I am Janet GOLDBERG, and I am an LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker. I work for Hartford Healthcare, and I'm a care manager that works on transitions for people that are coming out of the hospital and coming home and the services that they need. And since I work a lot with adults, I am finding that visual deficits is a topic that is happening more and more. And as I've gotten to be friendly with you, I've wanted to know more and more about the resources that can help people that are not only legally blind but visually impaired.
Awesome. And I hope to make this a conversation, so if I'm going on and you have a question, don't raise your hand, just speak right up. I brought some information with me that I gathered through my own experience and some research I did on the internet, and I gave you a copy, so feel welcome to read along, write on it, throw it at me if I get boring.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I always like to start with, and I lead a low vision support group, so I often get the question, well, what makes a person eligible for services for people who are blind in the state of Connecticut? And it's a little bit confusing because some services you have to be qualified, certified as legally blind. Other services you simply have to have a visual impairment that affects your ability to read or a reading disability. That can make service delivery and seeking services a little bit complicated. What I want to start with tonight, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, is services for the blind, which has what most of us who receive services refer to it as, but the full and official name is, it's the Department of Rehabilitation Services, or DORS, and it's the Bureau of Education and Services for the Blind, hereby and from this point on in this show referred to as BESB, or BESB. And just to give you a very quick overview of what BESB does, BESB provides services that are inclusive from, I like to call it womb to tomb, so birth to through any age. They are for all people who are both low vision and totally blind, and also for children who are considered visually impaired. And this is something we were talking about at dinner. What's the difference between visually impaired and legally blind and all of that? Well, it's a complicated explanation, but I'm going to just go into it very quickly. So to be certified as legally blind, there are two characteristic situations that qualify you. One is a degree of vision loss. So if in your best eye, after best correction, so that's important, not with your glasses on, you have a visual field that is 20 degrees or less.
Okay.
In your best eye after best correction. That would be legal blindness if you don't if you have that or less. The other is a acuity, so 22/100. So basically what that means is, again, in your best eye after best correction, if you still don't see better than 22/100 vision, 20/20 being considered perfect vision, a really easy way to think about it is that if you can only see the big E on the doctor's chart or less, or you can't see that E at all, then you are pretty much guaranteed that you're dealing with the legal blindness acuity.
Where is BESB located? Is there one main office in the state of Connecticut, or are they throughout the state?
Yeah, great question. BESB is located in Windsor, Connecticut.
Okay.
There are the staff serve the entire state, and there are some itinerant staff members who either work from home offices, they might be assigned to a school system and work. Most of the staff has a very large geographic area that they serve.
When someone is eligible for services, do the staff of BESB go out to the home, make home visits, or are people expected to come into the office?
What happens is when a person is at their ophthalmologist and they have become certified as legally blind, the first thing that happens is a letter gets sent from the ophthalmologist to BESB to notify them that there's another person to add to their roster to contact. That is something that is mandated. That's not something BESB said to all the doctors. That's a state requirement.
Okay.
What happens then is that when someone wants to initiate service, or a social worker will call them, or if you wanted to refer a family member, you would call, and that social worker would meet with the person who is potentially going to receive services in their home.
Okay.
They would meet with them in their home. They would first need to have the eye report verifying the legal blindness. Mm-hmm. And then the social worker would go and they would meet with the person in their home, and they would start to understand, to sort of assess, okay, what does this person need? And some of the services, some of the programs that BESB offer include orientation and mobility, which is essentially the training for independent travel, whether it's using a cane, and everybody who is legally blind has the option of learning how to learn to travel with using whatever vision they have. And if they don't have any usable vision to travel with safely, how to use a long cane for travel. They also, if it seems like the appropriate step, they could be prepared to go on to work with a guide dog. So all of that would qualify under orientation and mobility training.
Okay.
Another thing is rehabilitation teaching, which is essentially independent home skills management training. So how to do your ADLs. If you've always been a person who was sighted and now you have to cook and clean and groom yourself, shaving, makeup, things like that, matching your clothes, washing, ironing your clothes, those are all skills that you did as a sighted person. Now you've had a significant change in your vision and you need and want to do those things independently. A rehabilitation teacher can come out from Services for the Blind and teach you how to do those things.
And again, they'll come to your home?
Right, they'll come to your home.
I assume there's no cost for these services?
That is correct. There is no charge.
Okay.
Volunteer services, an incredible program offered through Services for the Blind. You can get volunteers to help with any number of things. One of the most common is to have a volunteer to come in and help read mail, the newspaper, the sale flyers, things like that. There can be volunteers to help with shopping. There can be volunteers to help with driving. There can be volunteers to help with getting yourself more versant on the internet. What the volunteer coordinator at Services for the Blind is fabulous. You tell her what you want, and she's a master at finding a volunteer who wants to help with that. Okay. Can't promise, but she's amazing at getting. So she's talked about people who've helped. Gotten volunteers to help them do photographic, going through all the photos and getting them put into scrapbooks, people who've helped with all sorts of things that you might not think of right off the top of your head.
Okay.
And so one of probably the most comprehensive programs and the one that gets utilized a lot is vocational training. Mm-hmm. So for someone who is of working age and loses their vision, or was born blind and is gone through high school, gone to college, and is looking for a job, or is graduated from high school and looking for a job, the vocational rehabilitation department of BESB will help them with job placement and keeping a job if you lose your vision while you're in a job. How can you possibly, if it's at all possible, now if you're a pilot for an airplane and you lose your vision, they're not going to be able to keep you in that job. So then that would be reassessing what do you want to do now that you can't be a pilot or a bus driver? But ideally, they will help people to maintain the job in the career that they're currently working in.
Is BESB a well-staffed and well-funded part of, I mean, is it a resource that truly has all this to offer?
It is a resource that absolutely truly has all this to offer. It is an agency that receives both state and federal funding. Grants from there are grants for children, there are grants for senior citizens. So there's a lot of streams of income.
Okay.
And they're all affected by budget cuts just like anything else. And sometimes your state money depends on, or your federal money depends on your state money, and every agency is experiencing cuts. And if you look at every one of these departments, there have been cuts. On the other hand, I can tell you that services are absolutely being delivered.
Okay.
There's a hiring freeze, so if someone retires, they can't automatically fill that position, but then other people are just scrambling to fill it. It's a struggle. It's a struggle to meet everyone's needs, to make your numbers work, to work with an ever-tightening budget that everyone's saying, well, we can cut that service, and you don't need those thousands of dollars, and you don't need those 5 staff people that have retired, and every single agency is facing that. So it can be complicated, but I can tell you as a recipient of services that what I'm telling you here does all exist and is delivered to the absolute best of their ability given the state of the state at the moment.
Switching gears.
Yes.
One of the conversations that we had that I found extremely helpful when you were talking about volunteers that could read and help you with things like that was you were telling me about some library services that existed, and I'd like to hear more about that.
That is one of my favorite services in the whole state, and it's really interesting that you brought it up because not only does the National Library, the Library of Congress, part of one of their programs is to have every state in the union have a library for the blind and physically handicapped. That's what they call it. They didn't make up the words. And the National Library Service, in this particular instance, is to provide Braille and audiobooks for people who are legally blind. However, unlike services with BESB, where you have to be legally blind, you do not have to be legally blind to receive services from the Connecticut Library for the blind and physically handicapped. You need to have a print disability and be unable to read traditional books from your regular library.
I love the conversations that we've had where we've read so many of the same books.
Yes.
And we're having like our own little book club, and I really had no idea that you had access to all these very popular books.
And this is a completely free service. The way that it works, and it's changed over the years. I remember very clearly, and this is a funny story, when I was always reading a bit above my age level, and I had ordered a Danielle Steele book, and it was one of the first books that I ordered of that genre, and it was on a record.
Oh, God.
And when I realized some of the content in that book, I didn't want anyone to overhear, like my mom. So I remember sitting like with my ear on the record player speaker with it as quiet as it could be so it wasn't shouting out into my room. Very, very funny. Now we've got little digital things that are no bigger than a cell phone, and no one who's any younger than me even knows there were record players to listen to books from NLS. So what it is that it's a completely free service. So once you've become eligible, and there's an application, and they can help you fill it out, or you can go online depending on your comfort level. If you are a client of Services for the Blind, they will help you to fill out that application. But like I said, you don't have to be a client to receive that service. Then what happens is that you can either say, I love all historical fiction. And I just don't care who the author is, I just want those kind of books sent to me. And if you're a Braille reader, you can get books in Braille, and you can also get books in an audio format. And like I said, years and years ago, it was a record. Then it went to a cassette tape, And now everything has been digitized, and so you're getting it on a digital cartridge. And they send you a player free of charge. So it's either a record player or at this point it's a digital player. And you receive your books through the mail in a little case with a card. And when you are done, you just flip the card over, put it back in the mail, and it goes back free of charge to the library, and you get your next book.
How long can you hold on to the books?
I believe that there is a time frame, but it's something like 6 months.
Okay.
So they're not expecting you to whip through these books in a minute flat.
And you can get more than one book at a time?
You can, absolutely. You can get books in both Braille and audio if you want. You can have different, you can also you have a reader assistant who's your librarian. And you can call them up and say, I just heard about this book, or I really love this author, or someone mentioned this to me, do you have it? There are also magazines. Many, many of the most popular and common magazines are available. Newspapers are available. And so there's a great resource, children's books, as well as books for adults, fiction and nonfiction. And as I said, you don't have to be legally blind, so you just have to be struggling with the ability to read or have a print disability that causes you not to be able to read in the traditional manner.
So these can be ordered by doing it online or by a phone call?
Yes, you can do it by phone call, or you can do it online, or you can do digital downloads. Instead of having the little player and the cartridge that I mentioned, similar to how someone would download a book from, say, Amazon or iTunes and onto their iPhone, you can they have an app, so you could put it on your iPhone, but you could also, there's a couple of different versions of sort of the Kindle for blind people or the digital reader for blind people, and you can download directly from the computer. I have 53 books on mine at the moment. Because you just never know what's going to pique your interest when you're lying in bed trying to read at night. Like, I don't want that book, I want this one, or maybe one of those other 53 I've got on there. And it's just wonderful. I mean, it's a most remarkable service, and there's one in every state. When in past where I've gone away for a long vacation, Braille books are huge. So let's say I love to read on vacation. Let's say I want to bring 4 books with me. Well, if you want to bring 4 Braille books with you, you're going to have at least 5 suitcases. And so I would sometimes work with the library of the state I was going to, or I would have my library send them to the address of where I was going to be. So that I wouldn't have to carry those 5 suitcases of Braille books that are so huge. So there's lots of cooperation among libraries. If a book I want isn't in the Connecticut Library Service, they'll find it somewhere else in the country and get it to me.
I was fascinated when you told me about this resource before, and it still find it wonderful to know it exists.
What I want to tell you is that it is an amazing, wonderful service. And I encourage people to call if they think that they might, benefit from this. If they're just interested in whether it will work for you, give them a call at 800-842-4516. All of these resources are also available at Connecticut, or I think it's just ct.gov.
Okay.
So you can look up resources that way. Along the same line, and since we're talking about gathering of resources and information, there's a great program in the state of Connecticut called the Connecticut Information System, which is CRIS, Connecticut Information. I'm getting it all wrong. I'm so used to just saying CRIS. And what this Connecticut Radio Information System does is it is going to, just like a radio, like think about the radios you used to listen to when you were in your drive in the summertime with the baseball game. Mm-hmm. It's that kind of a basic, simple, no frills radio receiver. But what it is it's a service here in Connecticut, and there used to be hundreds of them, and now they are being defunded.
Yes, that's
so
what
it's
I've heard.
really causing some problems, but they provide all kinds of information from over 70 sources, national newspapers, local newspapers. They read the obituaries, magazines, the circulars, and it's a schedule, just like you would have a TV schedule. At 8 o'clock on Monday mornings we do this, and at 9 o'clock we do this, and 5 o'clock we do the sports, and so you can get a program so you know exactly, I want to hear the obituaries, and I know that every day at this time I can turn on the radio and listen to the obituaries for half an hour.
How does someone obtain the radio?
The way that you obtain the radio, it's again, you don't have to be legally blind for this. You just have to have a reading disability,
Okay.
which is really awesome.
And again, no cost, I assume?
There is no cost.
Okay.
All that they ask is that when you are done using the receiver, when you no longer need it, that you return it.
Okay.
It's sent to you free. There are a lot of ways to receive it. So I've talked about the radio, but first, a lot of people like myself who live in a house that has lots of bricks, I think you have to live in the straw house that the first little pig built, because if you live in a house with bricks, you can't, it doesn't work. The signal doesn't get in. You can also receive it over your internet connection if you use Comcast and I think Cox and maybe other ones too, and you can receive it over the phone.
Okay.
So there are options. If you are interested, you should give them a call at 800-527-8000 or go to info or send an email to info@chrisradio.org.
Okay.
Or www.chrisradio. And it's CRIS.
Now, is this volunteers that do all the reading?
It's mostly volunteers. They have over 300 volunteers who read any number of different information. And an interesting story that I just heard recently that really touched me, and I'm not going to use the person's name, but a gentleman who was very involved in his community ran into a neighbor that he hadn't seen in a couple of weeks, and he was making conversation. He is blind, this gentleman I'm speaking of, and he asked after this man's wife, and the man said, "My wife died 3 weeks ago." And the gentleman was horrified because he would have gone to the service. He would have been much more involved had he known, but because he couldn't read the newspaper, he had no idea. One of the things that this can do is and this is, I think, the most popular program they have at Chris Radio with the highest, quote, listenership are the obituaries.
Wow.
I love the fact that I can listen to the circulars. I am very comfortable using my computer, but when I go to a website of something like Big Y or Stop and Shop or ShopRite, Kohl's, Ocean State Job Lot, their flyers are scanned in as a picture, as a graphic.
Right.
My software won't read it. So I can't do that myself. And I've found out in my world that many people don't enjoy reading the circulars like I do. So it's wonderful to have that as an option. Sports. I was talking to a gentleman who's a volunteer, and he said he started because he always wanted to be a sportscaster, and that didn't come true for him. So he decided that the next best thing was to be a sports announcer on Chris. So that's how he gets to be a sportscaster in his volunteer life.
In our talks about different resources, you were telling me about a Newsline.
Newsline is another similar program. It's a collaborative program between Services for the Blind, the National Federation of the Blind, which is NFB, and a couple of other things. And it's a telephone call-in way to get similar information. It's a reading service. It's very expansive. They have lots of different types of programs, different media that they cover, and all of it is accessed through your telephone.
Okay.
Either your regular telephone, like a regular telephone, touch-tone phone at home, or you can do it through your smartphone. They have apps that you can do it through your smartphone. Just quickly, I want to tell you a couple of the really cool things that Chris are doing. So they stream into the Children's Hospital and other hospitals and senior centers.
Okay.
So that's an option for people who are in the hospital. They have a Spanish language programming, which is really awesome.
That's fantastic.
And they're doing this really cool thing in museums. So if you have a smartphone and you use this QR code, which is, if I was more technical, I could explain what all that meant. But what that means is that you hold your cell phone, your smartphone, up to this QR code on a museum exhibit, and you get a human voice description of what the exhibit is. Like, that is a shark. Sharks are this big. Sharks are scary. They have big teeth. I mean, that's not really what it says, but
Right.
It's so cool. And they're going to do more of that. So
And
that's
Chris Radio is what's
Chris Radio
offering-
is doing that.
Okay.
So I just wanted to plug that because I think it's so cool. One of the things that we also, that it's sort of along this line but slightly different, is that many of the local movie theaters have what's called audio description service. And what that means is that as a blind person, I can go in, put on a pair of headphones, and get similar to the closed captioning for people who are hearing impaired. It's audio captioning. So I'm getting a verbal description of the action, the set, what's going on, the appearance of the people. Scary man with black masks sneaking up on unsuspecting lambs sitting on grass. And it happens in natural breaks in dialogue.
Oh.
There are apps on phones that can do this. This is available through certainly available through Comcast and also probably other cable companies as well.
So this can happen on your TV.
This happens on my TV.
But does it also happen in movie theaters?
It happens in movie theaters. It happens at plays. Like Yale Repertory Theater was the theater that pioneered this in Connecticut, but now it can happen at Hartford Stage. I know for a fact it happens at Hartford Stage. And Yale, it probably happens at the Bushnell and other places too that I'm not familiar with.
And it happens at natural breaks.
So there's a natural break in the action in the dialogue.
Okay.
And a voice will come on and describe what's going on. It's the coolest thing. It's so awesome. One of the things, so we've talked about, so some of these are state and or federally funded programs. Chris is not. Chris is state level, but Services for the Blind, the library that we talked about, that's a state and federally based program. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's really important that people sometimes forget to even think about, what does your own town offer?
Right.
And I can speak very knowledgeably about what West Hartford offers. I can't speak to other towns, but I would encourage anyone who might be watching this who's not in West Hartford to check with your town's social services. But West Hartford is preeminent in what they offer. There are a lot of reasons why I live in West Hartford, and the services available to me as a person with a disability is a huge part of why I'm here.
Okay, so?
So we have Dial-A-Ride, which is a transportation service, and lots of towns have Dial-A-Ride, which is a service, a door-to-door service for medical appointments and also pretty much anything else within the town of West Hartford. So if I am at my house and I want to go to a medical appointment within West Hartford, or lots of other places, if I want to go to the grocery store, if I want to go visit a friend, those are all things Dial-A-Ride can do. And that's an application. It's a once a year annual subscription, and you get 3 rides a week. And they also go to lots of local surrounding towns medical things. But what say you don't want to do Dial-A-Ride? The volunteer services in West Hartford include medical escort transports, which means that if you have a doctor's appointment, you call the medical escort program. You say, I've got a doctor's appointment in 2 weeks on a Thursday at 10 a.m. This is the doctor. This is how long the appointment will last. And a volunteer comes to your house, to your door, picks you up, takes you to your doctor, brings you into the office, into the waiting room, mm-hmm. waits for you and brings you home. Totally free. Okay. They also have grocery shoppers, people who will help with reading mail, friendly visitors. There's a huge range of social services that are available in West Hartford, no. and it's really important to know about those. And so I encourage people to call 860-561-7561, Human and Leisure Services, and find out what does the town have that might be able to benefit.
We are very blessed in the town of West Hartford.
We are
tremendous
so lucky.
Resources for the residents.
It's unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's so many more things to cover, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about quickly also is that there's lots of other transportation options through Connecticut Transit, through other different types of programs. So I encourage people just to do some research. Do a Google search if you know how to do that. Do a
211 info line.
211 exactly. 211 info line. There's so many programs. But just to sort of recap, so the big overarching is Services for the Blind, which is a state agency that provides services to people who are legally blind in the state of Connecticut, regardless of age. It's all services are provided free, and there's a wide range of services from independent living skills, travel training, vocational training. That's really important. The Library for the Blind is really important because that's a really good way to stay in touch with magazines, books. The love of reading is something that many, many people have and feel very frustrated that they lose when they start to lose their vision. And And I encourage you, again, 211 is a great resource because it's InfoLine and they have a lot of this information. If you are someone who's on the internet or know someone who is, go to ct.gov and see what's available recreationally, socially. There are support groups. There's just so much, and I can't possibly touch it all tonight. But what I want to say is, Janet, thank you so much for coming and for encouraging me to have this conversation in a more public way. I want to thank everyone out there for watching, for continuing to tune in to As I See It, A Blind Woman's View. If I can email any of this information to you, send me an email to ablindwomansview@gmail.com. Thank you again for tuning in, and once again, have a great month, and I'll see you next month.